So this week was a little bit tough emotionally, personally, and yet it was a spectacular reading week. And I've kind of started to realize when you're going through a tough time, horror might not be the best genre to be reading right now. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Nikhil with Shelf-Esteem. I'm a composer, now also a booktuber. You can find my music in The Wheel of Time Season 2, His Dark Material Season 3, and the newly released psychological horror film, Dead Whisper. So, I always like to talk about my reading roundup. It's kind of what I like to call it. It's like a weekly update where I apprise you all of what I've been reading, what I'm going to read, and things that happen on the channel, videos that were released, what I'm planning on releasing in the future, and then also a little bit about the music front, because as I mentioned, I'm a composer as well, and I work on a lot of book adaptations, and I kind of have a little bit of ear to the ground on adaptations in general. More on that later. And so, you know, I kind of like to marry these different worlds and hopefully offer a unique perspective on Booktube, because I think we're all the sum of our experiences, and it's fun to be able to kind of come from different vantage points. So without further ado, let's kind of dive into what I read this week. So this book was absolutely incredible, and I'm talking about Nick Cutter's The Deep. The Deep. Now, I absolutely adored this book. I read it in like 2 days. In fact, it feels like a lot like vintage Stephen King at his most vicious. Like something you would have seen in Cujo or something like that, you know? In terms of not the plot points or anything like that, but just the way he approaches the characters and kind of pulls the rug from under you. There's scenes in Pet Sematary that made me feel similar, and I feel like this book is no exception to the rule. And I had such a hard time reading this, and yet also I loved every moment of it. It's a weird feeling to have that kind of conflicting feeling while reading a book this great. But basically the long and short of it is there's this specific type of disease called the Gets, which is kind of infecting the population. It makes you forget kind of small things at first, and then like kind of like where you left your car keys and things like that, and your body starts to shut down as it forgets how to breathe. So pretty fatal disease. And so there is rumors of this kind of mystical substance called ambrosia down in the Mariana Trench, deepest part of the ocean. And so an expedition crew goes down there, they lose contact, and so there's a follow-up crew that goes down to investigate what might have happened to them. And the truth is pretty gnarly. So I'm just going to stop right there. That's basically a summary of the back flap. So no spoilers, of course, always on this channel, as much as I can help it. So this book plays on two fears. One fear about when you're down 8 miles below the surface of the ocean, there's an external conflict, right? Because it's all black out there. You can't see anything. You don't know what's out there, if there is anything out there. And one wrong move and you will just be pancaked, right? Because of the trillions of tons of pressure. The second part, which is even more unnerving in a lot of ways, which, you know, is kind of probably hard to believe, but is that your mind, you know, it's like you're isolated from the world. You're going where humanity was never meant to go. And what would that do to someone's mind after a while of being down there? And how would you keep a track of the days, you know? So there's kind of a two-pronged horror approach in this, but the bleakness of where it goes, it is diabolical. I've never actually read anything that has gone to this length before in terms of being bleak and diabolical. I absolutely loved it, and I had mentioned in a video I'm going to talk a little bit about later that it kind of opened itself up to a sequel. A sequel I don't know if my heart personally would be ready for after this book, but it would be incredible to read. I really hope Nick Cutter does it. And honestly, this is contention for Book of the Month right now. This is just unbelievable. It was such a surprise hit for me. So if you haven't read it, definitely check it out. I'm leaving all these links in the description, as I always do. And I'm an Amazon affiliate, so I make a small percentage of sales. It always helps out the channel. And I guess this is the time to say also, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Always helps the algorithm gods push this out to the relevant viewers, and I hope you're enjoying the content. I'll always continue to keep improving for you. So let's jump on to the next book. So the next book I read, I had a little bit less of I guess, lustrous experience reading it than The Deep, but it was still good. And that was My Heart is a Chainsaw. So I'll give you the good news first, because I like to keep this channel pretty positive. I read this whole book in like a day, I think, maybe a day and a half. So, and it's a 400-page book, so it reads really fast. I think I liked that aspect of it. It kind of felt like, you know, when you watch an 80s slasher flick or something, and you kind of know it's like there's a little bit of campiness to it. There's a little bit of like it doesn't feel quite so heavy and serious, so you can kind of breeze through it. That's kind of what I felt like reading this book. So if you like that kind of horror, you'll probably like Stephen Graham Jones and My Heart is a Chainsaw. For me, I felt like there was a couple of key elements that I felt kind of brought me down for this book, and I'll tell you what they are. So first of all, this is like a love letter to slasher films. There's slasher interludes in here where the main character is talking. Jade, her name is talking a little bit about slashers and kind of hidden connections between these different slashers and how they work, like how the killers work, how the survivors work. Because as you start to find out in this book, and again, it's in the inside flap, she starts to become a part of a slasher film playing out in real life, and she has to use her knowledge to try to find out who's doing it and stop it. So that's kind of the idea of this book. The execution didn't quite land for me in the sense that the writing is so casual, because it's kind of from Jade's perspective, and she's a 17-year-old girl, and it's just kind of a style of writing. It didn't really resonate with me. It's not really my thing personally. Not taking away from it, because I think it would be for a lot of people, just not for me personally. The second thing I thought was, I love the idea of the love letter to horror and to slasher films. The idea is great, but the execution was a little repetitive for me. I mean, everything she talks about, she links to the slashers. When she's talking to other people, trying to get them to believe her, she starts talking about slashers. Then every other page has kind of an interlude where it's like a little note that she's writing a particular person. I'm not going to give that away, but she's writing a bunch of notes about slasher films. So it just starts to feel like one-track mind kind of thing, but there's like nothing else there. And I felt like the payoff for me at the end, by getting through these books, it's kind of contradictory because I was reading it so fast. But getting towards the end of the book, I felt like there was more that could have been explored with, it's hard to say without spoiling, but I'm gonna just say there's more that could have been explored with this character, and maybe that was slashery, if that makes sense. I think there was more dimension to this character to be explored. I'm just going to leave it at that. So, I would say this was an okay book. I'll probably still read Stephen Graham Jones. I'll try another book just to see if his writing style was kind of more a reflection of the character, or if that's just kind of how he writes. In which case, it might not be for me, and that's okay. But I'm glad I've given him a shot, and it's been a really nice kind of adventure this month, getting to give different authors a shot I've never really tried before. So really excited about that. The third book I started, and this one is kind of a chonker, so there was no way I was going to get through more than, a few pages here and there. And that is The Terror by Dan Simmons. So this one, I was trying to hold it up to the light here. Okay, so this one was a recommendation from Cliff from Cliff's Dark Gems. He has raved about this book. I've always wanted to try Dan Simmons, and I've never gotten a chance to, but I've heard he's a wonderful author. And this particular one is about an expedition to Antarctic, or the Arctic Circle, in 1845. And it's kind of based on a true story. So there's like a historical fiction element to it, and also a horror thing. Because, again, two-pronged approach. I kind of love that. I'm starting to realize I love that aspect of horror books, is when you have one story and you have another story kind of interlaid, kind of like The Deep, like I was saying. This one is like, an expedition in the 1840s. Could you imagine exploring places where, again, humanity was never meant to go, probably? It feels like that, at least at that time. That brings its own set of very unsafe conditions, and harsh conditions and scary conditions. And then there might be a supernatural element that is kind of insinuated as well. So two-pronged approach seems to work for me. So that's been my kind of what I've read. So it's kind of a lengthier what I've read, because I read quite a bit this week. But what am I going to read? So I'm going to read through The Terror, but this is a longer book, and I when I have a longer book, I always like to break it up with something else that's analogous but shorter. And so I'm thinking about reading Carrie by Stephen King, because that's his first published work. I still haven't read it yet. I love the film to death. I've watched it like dozens of times. I'm interested to see how they compare. And I would love to know, like, after this video, comment below and let me know if you've read and watched it, or just, read or just watched. What were your thoughts on the story? And kind of, if you've done both, then I would love to know kind of how they compare as well. So definitely let me know. It's always like to keep this a dialogue. It's fun, rather than just like hey, thanks for watching. It's more like, hey, what? Yeah, I'll just ask questions back to you, because it's fun to chat. And of course, we have a Discord channel as well, which is linked below. So if you want to keep the conversation going beyond this video, you can always feel free to do so. We have a small but growing community there, and it's just wonderful. So feel free to join that. All are welcome. So I'm going to read those two books this coming week and just kind of see how far I get. I'm just going to kind of take it casually. Now, this week on the channel was very, very interesting. So I was going to originally do a particular video I'm going to save for next week, which I'll talk a little bit about in a moment. But I received the most incredible package from author Janny Wirtz, who is the author of To Ride Hell's Chasm. She also has written her magnum opus series, The Wars of Light and Shadow, of which she kindly sent me like a bunch of books from that series and autographed them and everything. And I did a whole video about that because I wanted to, I figured the least I can do is to do a proper video thanking her from the bottom of my heart for being so gracious and like sending me a nice letter and everything like that. And just like wonderful person. We've been communicating back and forth on Twitter. And she's been okay from the hurricanes, everyone, because she was right in the eye of the storm, it seems, but minimal damage to the house and they're all okay. So thankfully that's a great relief to hear. And amidst all that going on, she sent me this package. So I just, like, the least I could do is thank her, and I'm so excited to get going with Wars of Light and Shadow. And after I'd done that video, a bunch of you had commented and said you'd want to be a part of a soft read along if this doesn't win the poll that I have, which is a community poll I posted about 2025 series read along. So if you haven't checked that out, I'm also linking that below, of course, and you can always vote. We have 2 more weeks before I am pulling down the post and tallying up all the votes and deciding which is going to be our 2025 series. So let's get on it and get more people on board because it's going to be a lot of fun next year. So that was the first video. The second video I did was top 5 horror books that I think deserved a sequel. Now, this could be a series, it could be a standalone, but sometimes things end ambiguously and you're like, there's more stories to be explored there. So I'm linking that also above there that you could check that out if you haven't. I was really proud of that video because I always try to find, I love doing tags. I love doing things that other booktubers have done. I also like to find things that maybe have not been explored before. And Booktube is such a large community, which is wonderful. And there's so many content creators out there. It's harder and harder to find things that have not really been explored that much. So it's always really a fun thing when one can make that happen. So that was a video that I posted as well recently. So we are sitting at 626 subscribers right now. Amazing, like 2,100, 2,200 hours of watch time. Amazing that all of you have, subscribed and wanted to be a part of the community. And I just want to make this a positive thing where we can read books and spotlight books that, we might not have otherwise read. And same goes for you. Always let me know, kind of what you think I should be reading. And I'm always taking that into account when I'm making my monthly TBR. So, and also, interesting thing happened. A YouTube channel called Next Chapter did a whole Mistborn adaptation, possible news or possible conjecture video. And they had Daniel Green's video, which, I had talked a little bit about his thoughts on a possible Mistborn adaptation, and my video side by side, which was so cool. And I talked a little bit about in my adaptation news episode 1 segment about how I'm seeing some promising leads that might lead one to insinuate that a Mistborn adaptation is at least in the works in the background, even if there are no formal announcements yet. So I'm linking the Next Chapter video up there. Lovely guys, and I just really appreciate the shout out, you guys. So thanks so much for doing that. And I'm looking forward to, watching more of your channel as well. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about next week. So next week, I want to do that video that I wasn't able to do this week because I decided to put the Janny Wirtz one up front and center, and that is the perfectly paced books. So they could be long, they could be short, but sometimes there's books that have an act 2 that drags in the middle. So I want to highlight the ones that don't have that are kind of smooth sailing all the way through. And there are a few books that I had on the list, so I'm going to post about that. If there's enough, I'm going to tally up the news segments after this video and see if there's enough. I might do a second episode of adaptation news because I'd mentioned to you I wanted to do that once a month, maybe once a little bit sooner. And I've gotten such positive reviews from people about that adaptation news that, I figured it's a good thing to do it every couple weeks or something. 2-3 weeks is kind of what I'm thinking. So I'm going to do another episode of that. That's kind of the plans for next week. And now on a personal note, I kind of mentioned at the beginning of this video that it was a little bit of a tougher week. And that is unfortunately because on Friday, and this is one of the reasons why this reading roundup is going up on Monday instead of the usual Sunday mornings, is on Friday I unfortunately found out that my grandfather, who lives in the UK, passed away. It was kind of sudden, but also expected. I mean, he was 93, And I am just so grateful that I got a chance to see him in June. I'd kind of posted about my UK trip there. And I just had this feeling sometimes, like, I mean, he was definitely getting up there in age, but also, like, you just kind of sometimes know, like, this might be the last time. I really want to make sure I see them and stuff. So, but, he declined very fast, and we didn't expect him to go so soon. So my parents, I was kind of helping them with arrangements and things like that this weekend. So things got a little bit tied up there. But, it's tough losing a loved one, especially, I'm 40 years old now. It's like some of my earliest memories were with my grandfather and grandmother in the UK. So it's always tough losing someone you love, and that much more when you've had, even more time with them. Ironically, right? I guess when you don't have enough time with them, you feel like I could have had more. When you have more time with them, you feel, that emotional bond that much deeper. So it was tough. And, honestly, reading The Deep was probably not the best idea during that time. But actually books have been a really good solace, and this community has been a good solace. I've just not been participating the last couple of days as much, but I've been, kind of watching videos and stuff, and that's been a really nice balm on the wound during this time. So moving on to the music front. Music front was actually gangbusters this week. I worked on this Diwali track I'd mentioned to you I'm working on for a dance campaign. It's like going to be a commercial and everything like that. So been doing changes on that. I finished the city council theme song that I had mentioned I was working on, like this modern pop song. So that got delivered. It debuted last night, and it seemed to do really well. So that was really wonderful to see. And then I've been kind of prepping some recording sessions for my personal albums because, during a time when the industry is so tumultuous, I'm like, I don't want to rely on just music for media. I want to make art for art's sake. And, with the AI conversation being kind of front and center, I think it's important for art to be made for art's sake. And so I've been trying to do that, and I'm kind of prepping for some recording sessions tomorrow for that album. More info on that soon. So that's what's been going on there. And then I had, I'm kind of working on the final delivery for this French TV show. I mentioned I was jumping on a bunch of cues that a few cues turned into like maybe 18 minutes of score that I've written now for this, for a friend of mine who's a composer and a fantastic composer. And so, yeah, we've been kind of working on the final episode deliveries and kind of last minute edits and fixes and recording sessions for that as well. And I've also kind of continued work on this game that I think I mentioned I've been working on called Twin Cores. It's an indie game. But the interesting thing about this game and why I got along so well with the developers, it is influenced by two series, The Dark Tower by Stephen King and The Cosmere by Brandon Sanderson, two of my favorites. So, and you can kind of see a little bit of the influences of that, Avatar, The Last Airbender. There's just kind of a confluence of cultures and history and lore that is really evident, and I'm super excited to kind of dive back into that world, because, with games, the music side of things ends up being spread out over like 3-4 years, so you have a lot of time between little asks that are required of you. And so, it's been a few months now since I've been on that project, and I'm kind of jumping back on to work on some new stuff for that. So very exciting things all around. And it's always nice to keep yourself busy with work when, you experience a family tragedy or anything like that. So that's been my week. It's kind of a roller coaster of a week, but let me know how your week has been, kind of what you read, anything cool happened to you this week. I always like to create a community, as I always say, of, fellow readers and book lovers, and some of the kindest people I've ever met, have been through this Booktube community. So feel free to kind of let us know how your week has gone, and let's share some books together. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Again, it really helps out the channel, and I'm just grateful to have you all here. I'm Nikhil with Shelf-Esteem. Be good to yourselves, be good to each other. I hope you have a wonderful week, y'all, and I'll see you on the next video. Take care.